Welcome to the Michael Liebowitz Show. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and joining me today is Libertarian legend. He's an author, a columnist, all-around great guy, Mr. Sheldon Richman. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm not even sure I'm a legend in my own mind, but go ahead.
Well, I called you a libertarian legend one time, and then Gene Epstein gave me heck for it, tell me why I don't refer to him as a libertarian legend. So I've gone with, from now on, you're a libertarian legend. That's all
I take
there
it
is
as a
to it.
euphemism for old.
Oh, okay.
And I
All right,
think
he's an
most
old
people will.
libertarian. All right, we have an old guy with us today.
I'm an
But
OL, OL, not OG, OL.
oh well. But the fact that he is old, he's been around today's topic for quite some time, and that is the liberty movement. And as someone that's been reading up on this stuff myself for over a quarter of a century now, I came up with an idea. I want to have a bunch of people who have been involved in this movement and tell me what their take on it is. So my first question to you, Sheldon, is what is the liberty movement?
Well, in your email to me, you might have slipped, but you said
I did.
you used plural. You said liberty movements. And I read a lot into that, and I would endorse that. I don't think, unlike my sense of earlier, although this could also be criticized, I guess, my memories of the 70s, 80s, 90s. I think it's never been more fragmented, never. And so maybe some of those fragments don't even count as liberty, pro-liberty in the deep sense that I mean it, and perhaps you mean it, because I can think of one issue that begins with an I that's very big, where I think a lot of people fall short, and I have a hard time thinking they're interested in liberty. So, but if you want to use it very broadly, yeah, there are a lot of fragments, and I don't think it's in very good shape. I mean, it doesn't seem to be in good shape. I'm very discouraged, and I didn't expect to be discouraged at this at the legend. When I hit the legend status, when I was younger, when I thought when I hit the legendary status, I'm going to be feeling pretty good that we've achieved a lot of liberty. And we used to say liberty in our time in the late 60s and 70s. That was our slogan, at least some of us around Philadelphia in that area. Liberty in our time. Or, yeah, no, maybe it's freedom in our time. That scans better. Freedom in our time, FIOT. I'm not seeing it. So it's a discouraging time for me, for a lot of people too. I'm not special, but
Sure.
I could be more upbeat.
So you're correct. I did use liberty movements, and I did for a reason. I didn't want to use that now because I don't want to throw people off right off the bat. But I will say this. In reading Brian Doherty's book, Radicals for Capitalism, Freewheeling History of the Modern Libertarian Movement, if you go back to, say, the 60s, it seems to me, and I might be misreading this, but it seems to me that the main issue was, there were two. There were two main splits that I could see. One was in whether we should be making a moral argument a la Rand and Rothbard, Frederick Bastiat, or more of a utilitarian argument, Mises and Milton Friedman. That was one split. The other one was between minimal government being necessary versus the ANCAP argument. But everybody basically wanted the same thing, right? Yeah. It was about how to get there. The idea was that people should be free to do whatever they want so long as they don't prevent others from exercising equal freedom to do the same, right? But since that time, it's like insane. For one thing, in my initial, while I was incarcerated reading about the liberty movement, I never read the Hoppe stuff. And so that has thrown, in my view, a significant wrench in the whole idea. And then the immigration stuff, which largely comes from the Hoppe stuff. I want to get into other stuff too, and the objectivist aspect of the movement and whatnot. But for now, just what is the sort of Hoppian idea, and how does it differ from what you and I think, would call mainstream, for lack of a better word, libertarianism.
Let me go back to the beginning of your question for a second.
Okay.
In case I need it, remind me about Hoppe. You were trying to characterize the 60s, early into the 70s. I think there was a third divide. So you said, government militarism versus anarcho-capitalism, moral versus a more economic approach, not necessarily utilitarian, but it wasn't necessarily greatest happiness for the greatest number, but society materially, generally, will be better off, and that's a better. David Friedman, for example, used to debate George Smith over this very issue, ethics versus economics, and he didn't put it in strictly utilitarian terms, like a calculus. There was a third divide, though, foreign policy. Vietnam was on, of course, and Rothbard was leading certainly a part of the movement that was, the phrase he coined was the centrality of foreign policy, motivated by the old Randolph Bourne slogan, war is the health of the state. So it was definitely tied into the size of government and how intrusive government will be. I still think that analysis is very strong and holds up fine. But there was a debate over Vietnam, but not just specifically Vietnam, but also generally over how muscular should the U.S. central government be. So there were people, for example, at Reason magazine, spearheaded by Robert Poole, who was is still a very important person at the Reason Foundation and Reason magazine, who was, very what they would call strong on national defense. And then you had the Rothbardians and others. There were more independent segments of the movement too, who took a much more non-interventionist. They cited Cobden and Bright in England, right? The people that organized against the Corn Law Leagues in the middle of the 19th century, but they were also non-interventionists. They wanted Britain to retrench, not try to manage the balance of power in England, in Europe. So that's a third pillar. So now let's get to Hoppe. I remember when Hoppe came on the scene. Of course, he came being vouched for by Murray Rothbard. At this time, this was right before I had my own falling out with the Mises Institute kind of galaxy. I was very close to the Mises Institute from its founding till about 1990. We were on the same wavelength, and this is around the time Hoppe started to come on. And there were huge debates about his argument for rights, this kind of rationalistic, almost ontological argument, reminds me of St. Anselm and Gog, right? About how we can get rights. As soon as you open your mouth, you're claiming ownership of your larynx, there's the whole case, you're done. And that's it, I'll go, bye, I'm leaving. I mean, I don't think that works. But lots of libertarians debated it. There was a Libertarian magazine in those days called Liberty. It was published by the late Bill Bradford. That was a great magazine, had great debates going on in there, internal debates. It was really, it was an inside baseball magazine, really. And they had forums about, pros and cons of Hoppe's argument. Then, of course, the immigration stuff came along. Now, the original thing with Hoppe was not about immigration. It wasn't blood and soil. It wasn't nationalism. It was this rationalistic argument for rights, right? As soon as somebody makes an argumentation, kind of wins the day, and you've claimed ownership, so therefore you can't deny it to somebody else. It's only a little bit later, at least as far as my awareness goes, that he and Rothbard begin to turn on immigration. And Murray writes this 1990. I knew Rothbard. We were on very good terms all of his life. In 1994, the year before he dies, he writes an article, a paper in the Journal of Libertarian Studies, a Mises Institute journal. It's larger. It's about nationalism, but he has a section on immigration, and he says, "I've changed my mind about immigration. Recently this year, I've written articles criticizing his article showing it didn't show that at all. The historical example used wasn't even a case of immigration. It was a case of settler colonialism by Russia or the Soviet Union versus Latvia and Lithuania. So people can look that up if they want on my Substack. But Hoppe has had a huge influence, as you know, on a whole, what we'll call a segment of the liberty movement, if we want to still think it qualifies as a liberty movement. Hoppe said some pretty terrible things about even in a free society. What did he say? Communists would be kicked out, gays would be kicked out. These are just people who have ideas or engage in peaceful activity. He didn't say like communists who are trying to set bombs set off bombs and kill people. Sorry. He just says people who think a certain way. And I think he even said, and other degenerates would be expelled or not tolerated. So there was lots of very dubious stuff coming out of Hoppe, which you hear people today, especially some prominent podcasters, will cite Hoppe as one of their great idols. And I don't understand it. It's not libertarian.
No. So, okay. I'm going to just run through some quick splits that occurred. Obviously Rand and Rothbard had their split. Rothbard had splits with the Cato Institute. I mean, there's been a lot of different splits within the liberty movement. And then, so we
almost as many as the Marxists.
Right. So we fast forward now into where we are today. So when I came out of prison, this was my initial goal, right? I had said, look, we all have so much more in common than we do differently. Why can't us liberty-minded folks work together instead of criticizing each other? That's what I thought. Famous last words. Yeah, how ignorant I was, because I quickly came across, I was the spokesperson for the Libertarian Party in Connecticut. And then I'm coming across posts from the New Hampshire Libertarian Party about how, they want their girlfriends to look at them like Israeli hostages looked at Hamas when they were being released. Just disgusting stuff. There was a post from the Alabama Mises Caucus praising the Unabomber. And so I said, okay, I want nothing to do with this, So I said, I'm not calling myself a libertarian any longer. I don't want to be associated with them. I didn't even call myself an objectivist, and I don't now. But I'll get to that in a minute. So Jim Valiant convinces me through debate that I should be calling myself an objectivist. He said, look, you agree with far more. And I really didn't have a refutation for him at that time. So I said, okay, I'll call myself an objectivist. Now, mind you, I was woefully ignorant here too. I figured when I got out of prison, I'll be able to get into internet chat groups with other objectivists and reasonable people, and it's going to be great. Okay, not so much. Because there's people who call themselves objectivists who praise virtually everything Donald Trump does, praise his approach on immigration, even some of them praise his tariffs. And I'm just like, that's absurd. So that was one wing. Then recently, now my view on the Constitution is different than yours, right? I'll just so nobody gets confused and thinks you're a supporter. I am. I'm an originalist. Not because I think the Constitution is perfect, but because I think if you're going to go by something, you ought to go by it and not have judges and legislators arbitrarily passing laws or determining what the law is. Right. So there were objectivists who were basically calling Trump a Nazi, calling ICE the Gestapo, which I thought was hyperbolic. But, I got the critique. I personally don't like to engage in hyperbole because for my credibility, I just, I say what I think and that's it. I don't need hyperbole. But they criticized that. They criticized his, flouting the Constitution. Then the Iran war came about. And I said, look, as my political party, the American Capitalist Party, put out a statement that I wasn't behind. I mean, I didn't write it. I agreed with it, but I didn't write it. And it said that because Mark, the chairman, Mark is a supporter of Israel, and he would support the war with Iran under most circumstances. But what he said was, look, as principled constitutionalists, we cannot support this war with Iran because it violates the Constitution. And that's clear as day that it violates the Constitution. I don't even know how people try to make an argument. And objectivists soon came out and started attacking us. And I'm just like, wait a second. 2 weeks ago, you said this guy was like Hitler for not following the Constitution. But now, because you favor a war with Iran, you're all for it, violating the Constitution. And then so they said to me, okay, well, if it were constitutional, would you support it? And my answer to that was, well, I'm not saying there's no case for war with Iran, but I'm not convinced. But given the current commander-in-chief and how I think he would conduct a war, I'd be very, very hesitant to support it. And then I was criticized for saying that. Oh, well, you can't choose the president who it is when you go to war. That's not a reason to oppose. Weeks after, some of those same people are just nonstop criticizing Trump's execution of the war, and nobody has come out and said, hey, you know what? Well, I shouldn't say that. Two people did. Jim Valiant told me I was right, and Jerome Brook told me I was right. But by and large, nothing. My point here is that it seems like with a significant portion. Now, I say that, Sheldon, with the caveat. I used to be on a radio show regularly, and the host told me you can't judge the audience by the people that call. So similarly, you can't judge objectivists and libertarians by the most active on social media. There's quiet people that we don't know. But there's a significant portion of people on social media that call themselves objectivists who have supported Trump, supported an unconstitutional war, similar to the way, in my view, people who have called themselves libertarians, they endorsed Trump rather than endorse Chase Oliver. They are very, Dave Smith said he wants to see the military on the border to stop immigration. And that's just not, that has nothing to do with the type of things that I wanted to fight for, right? So before we can even say, well, what's the state of the movement? I agree with you that there really is no coherent movement. Now, I know I said a lot, but I want to get your take.
Wow, you did say a lot. And I have to now go back and think over the individual strands. No, I agree with you about this take on immigration. That some terrible things have been said by people who are very prominent on the internet, have shows, and call themselves libertarians and are thought of as libertarians. And I can recall hearing three guys, two of them from New Hampshire, by the way, say things like, I don't want to be known in the future as somebody who defended the principles of liberty. I want to be known as somebody who's defended our culture and our country. And they were talking about immigration, of course. Actually, I'm very surprised you've told that story about the tweet you once saw defending the Unabomber. I can't imagine. I mean, I don't know what any libertarian would have in mind in doing that. I mean, that's got to be one kind of outlier. I mean, it's not even something like, oh yeah, I've heard others say that they're nuts. I've never heard anybody. I mean, what would you even say? First of all, it was like anti-industrial for one thing, right? Anti-technology. He wanted to bomb. Yeah. He was bombing people who were specialized in high tech and stuff like that. I mean, I don't even get it. Anyway, leave that aside. It just occurred to me when you said that. So immigration shows up as the big one, but I think that's really going to be the tip of the iceberg. If you're taking that position, that anti-freedom position on immigration, there's got to be stuff under the surface of the water, right? Much bigger than the tip that leads you there. Because look, they've tried to make some defense. Certainly, Smith has, regarding use of so-called public property. The property that the government now controls, which they say, of course, should be privatized, but right now it's not. And so therefore the government ought to run it as kind of if it's a private owner or the name of hypothetical, theoretical private owners. I've written at length about that. Of course, they've paid it no mind. But I've never seen anybody take me on. Let them take me on in print, and if they're right, I'll say they're right, or I'll answer them. Because I don't think you can't get there from where they're starting. You can't get there from where they want to start. It just doesn't work. I like to sum it up by saying there's a difference between a stop sign at an intersection and a stop sign at the border. You can't use the same principle applies. If we can have stop signs, and as a libertarian today, while the government's controlling the streets, yeah, you can have stop signs. It doesn't then seamlessly move on to, well, then you can have stop signs and barriers and troops at the border. What's the difference? I mean, that's the other side tries to make that. If they can keep pedophilic heroin addicts out of the girls' bathrooms in public elementary schools, you can have border control. That's nonsense. That's a lazy man's attempt to make an argument. And I've examined it, and I've even talked about it. You've talked about it on your show, but I know I talked about it with Jacob Hornberger and other people. So I put it out there, but I don't hear anybody refuting me because I'm not sure there's a refutation. I keep thinking about it, but I haven't come up with one. So that seems to be the big one, but I can't help but it's symptomatic of a underlying collectivism. I agree with you about, look, even though we have differences about the origins of the Constitution and what, I mean, I think there were some benign motives. I'm not saying it's all bad, negative motives on the part of the framers, but I am a Lysander Spoonerite. But that doesn't mean while it's in effect, I want the most restrained reading of it, the most constraining of government meaning. I want that. I support, the 5-4 decision in the Supreme Court about birthright citizenship. Actually, I favor birthright citizenship anyway, but I believe it's very clear in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, of course. It's also possible people don't seem to get this. Because a lot of people think if I like it, it must be in the Constitution. And if I dislike it, it's not in the Constitution. So this is a coherent position, although I think a lot of people won't understand it. And it's not mine, but I'm saying it is. I oppose birthright citizenship, but unfortunately, it's in the Constitution. I've never heard anybody say that. Surely there's somebody who takes that position.
Which is very coherent.
You never hear that. Or the other way around. You could say, I would love birthright citizenship, but damn it, it's not in the Constitution.
Right. Personally, I'm pro-choice. I think the court in Roe v. Wade erred in saying it's a constitutional right to abortion, right? But I am pro-choice. Randy Barnett in his book Restoring the Lost Constitution, basically he didn't phrase it this way, but in essence, a good test for your honesty is if there's things that are constitutional that you disagree with. Because if you just think that this is a document that just agrees with every policy position you have, the odds are you're misinterpreting it.
Yeah.
And I'm opposed to government taxation, to compulsory taxation.
Yeah.
Clearly, the Constitution allows it.
It also allows eminent domain.
Right.
But here's what people don't get. I'm not pointing to the Fifth Amendment taking clause when I say that. Don't forget the taking clause is the Bill of Rights, and that was added on after. The takings clause does not say government shall have the power of eminent domain, but they have to pay just compensation. All it said was it can't take without just compensation. It already the takings already presupposed in the body of the even though it's unstated. So when Madison said that the Constitution is a document of few and defined powers, he knew he wasn't telling the truth, because later on, when they were debating the Bill of Rights, he said, no, there have to be powers by implication. He's the father, perhaps the father, maybe he's just the son, of the implied powers doctrine, even though he's considered the father of there are no implied powers. So they assumed there was eminent domain. Imagine if the Bill of Rights had never been accepted. They believed there was eminent domain, because otherwise, why would they limit eminent domain? You can't limit an eminent domain if you don't presume that it exists in the first place. So, and you could probably come up with other examples about the Constitution. One of the things I like about Spooner, apart from his Constitution of no authority, but about the matter of slavery, he argued within the Constitution, right? He played the Constitution game, and his great book, which you can find online, The Unconstitutionality of Slavery. Remember, all the abolitionists said it's unconstitutional. Right, William Lloyd Garrison burned the Constitution on Boston Common because he said it was a pact with the devil and an agreement with hell. Spooner said, hang on, it's unconstitutional. The word slavery is nowhere in the Constitution. And where we all know they were referring, he's not playing a game here, he's not being obtuse. Where we all know they're referring to slaves, like the 3/5 clause and stuff, which was in the original Constitution, they didn't say slave. So we're entitled to interpret that in the most pro-freedom way. In other words, he's saying to the framers, if you mean slaves, write it down. Otherwise, we are not bound by slavery if you don't write it down. And they say like other persons, they said 3/5 of other persons, of all other persons. He said, we should be able to use our brains and come up with a pro-freedom interpretation of what other persons mean. We know they mean slaves, but they didn't say slaves. So we're entitled to give it up because it's supposed to be a pro-freedom document, he says. So we should give it a pro-freedom thing. And so what does he come up with? He says, well, maybe they meant resident aliens. Okay, they're not citizens. They live here legally. And so they're not going to count as a full person for representation and taxation. That seems like a perfectly reasonable thing. But he said, if you mean slaves, write it down, buddy. And I think he's right about that.
I love Lysander Spooner, by the way. I find him to be a very challenging.
I disagree with him on IP.
I disagree with you on IP, but
nobody was hardcore on IP than Lysander Spooner.
So another thing that I've come across quite a bit, and it's an interesting thing because people assume if you oppose their view, they assume you're in the opposite tribe.
Yeah.
Right. I've been called a Palestinian shill by the pro-Israel people, and I've been called a Zionist shill by the pro-Palestinian folks. Now, you, Sheldon, are one of the few that I've come across who's both critical of Israel and critical of the virulent anti-Semitism that's out there.
And I'm pro-West.
And pro-West,
and
yes.
Pro-capitalism. Pro-individualism. Yes. I don't believe in national self-determination. I believe in literal self-determination.
Yeah.
Self. Nations don't have selves.
Right. So recently, somebody said to me, that the debate was if you're an anti-Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. And I said, that's just not true. I said, listen, I'm not anti-Israel. I'm far more pro-Israel than you are, Sheldon. But I said, but just because you oppose Israel, and I used you as the example. I said, look, Sheldon Richman publicly criticized the Mises Institute for putting a Nazi or a Holocaust denier on their platform. How are you going to then turn around and say Sheldon Richman, who also happens to be Jewish, is an anti-Semite because he criticizes
by
Israel?
birth, not by
right. You're right.
But I'm not. But I don't believe in this genetic. That's Hitler's. Hitler wins if we call somebody Jewish because he's got Jewish blood. There's no such thing as Jewish blood. Oh, by the way, on the line about the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, Jewish anti-Zionism is as old as Zionism.
Yes.
That's literally true if you read the history. So nobody can maintain seriously that anti-Zionism equates. That doesn't mean that some anti-Zionists aren't anti-Semites. No.
Well, that's where I'm actually going with this, because while it's true, it's also true that anti-Zionism is a convenient hiding place for anti-Jews.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you could argue that's invited. If you insist that Israel is the nation of the Jewish people, no matter where they live, then you're kind of in a way inviting that. I don't mean they necessarily want that to happen, but people do that. So there's not an ambiguity. There's a problem there on both sides.
But this is what happens, and this is kind of what I want to get into. Whenever I comment, like say I criticize Dave Smith in a post, inevitably there's a flood of okay Jew, okay wits, stop occupying.
You got a Jewish name.
Yeah, stop occupying my country. All that kind of stuff. Now, first of all, that stuff, that anti-Jew stuff, has infiltrated corners of the liberty movement or liberty movements. But also, when we get to the podcasters that you talked about, it's not popular to be out there talking about abolishing minimum wage, deregulating the economy, getting rid of antitrust laws, liberalizing immigration. You're not going to get a huge audience. If you are willing to go out there on a regular basis and criticize Israel and immigration, you'll blow up. Now, I'm not saying that they're necessarily dishonest. I just know the potential for audience capture. I once had a prominent podcaster tell me, you should do this. And I said, no, I'm not going to sell my integrity for views. And his answer was, well, you can do it in the short run. And then once you build your audience. And I said, the type of audience that I'm going to build doing that is not the type of audience that I
Michael,
want.
you're disappointing me. In other words, for ratings, you won't
Right.
invite
I mean,
Nick Fuentes on your show?
no.
I'm outraged. I can't stand it.
Yeah. Right. So, and somebody, and it's been suggested to me, and I've actually thought about it, that I should reach out to people that can fund me. The problem is when you get funding, now there's expectations about what you're going to say, and rightly so. If I'm putting my money behind something, I want to know what they're talking about and what they're saying,
Sure.
but I want to say whatever the hell I want to say. But I do think that there's a problem amongst the podcasters that use the label libertarian, but in order to keep an audience, they promote very anti-libertarian ideas. Do you think that's an issue?
I do, and that's why I think that those of us who call ourselves libertarians and are for free immigration and these other things, who think Nick Fuentes is someone you wouldn't want to spend like a nanosecond with, should talk up immigration and cosmopolitanism and all that stuff to such an extent that other group won't want to use the word anymore. You know how they'll say, well, I don't want to call myself a libertarian. Look at those guys. They're for free immigration, open borders, and all kinds of terrible things. So that's my goal, to bring them to a point where they don't want to touch the word with a 10-foot pole. That would be progress, right? You'd agree that would be progress if the people you have in mind went on and said, I am no longer a libertarian. They're for too much freedom. I'm more of a blood and soil nationalist.
Oh my God, it's gross. All right, so that's the movement. What I want to know now is this, Sheldon. You talked about the slogan "Freedom in Our Time" and how you've grown pessimistic. Policy-wise, in your lifetime, what have been the gains that the liberty movement has achieved, and what are just significant losses?
Well, when you say achieved it, the question is how much of a role did the movement have in bringing it about?
Yeah.
I can separate it. Certainly, there have been high points where progress was made in policy and I don't see how the movement can really take credit. But I can name a couple things. So the one that comes to mind is the end of the draft under Nixon, and Milton Friedman certainly had a big role in that. He was. I guess he was on a commission or he testified. I forget the whole story, but so he's very big. He was writing about it. Great. So no, that's not the movement, but that's certainly a high point. Under Jimmy Carter, people kind of think that it's under Reagan, but under Jimmy Carter, we get very substantial deregulation of trucking and airlines, because the government in those days was dictating routes, what airline could enter a route, and of course the other airlines could say, we got enough in here, we don't need any new entry, and regulating rates. Same, trucking was heavily regulated. Now, I can't take I don't think the movement can take credit for that, but we certainly were cheering it on in the late 70s. Alfred Kahn, who's not only was a free, generally free market kind of economist, not a hardcore libertarian, he gets a lot of credit for that. Actually, Teddy Kennedy in the Senate was a big advocate of that. He became convinced that the consumer would benefit. So you'd think of Reagan-style deregulation before Reagan is even elected president. Very big. You don't get that much under Reagan. He accelerated decontrol of price controls over oil and stuff. So I guess we can give him that. But one thing he never did was he didn't get rid of draft registration. When the Soviets went into Afghanistan in '79, I guess, Carter, I think by executive order, the draft had ended in '73 or something. He imposed draft registration, right? Everybody age 18 had to go down to the post office, pre-internet, sign a card with your address. I can't remember whether Reagan promised to get rid of that, but he talked the libertarian game in some ways when he was in his career and when he was actually running for president. But did he change that? Did not do that. So we certainly were not powerful enough to or influential enough to get him to change that. And he had some libertarian types within his administration. I mean, libertarian types. I mean, for a while, Doug Bondo, who's written, who's a libertarian, specializes mainly in foreign policy. He would have been talking about the draft. But we didn't get that. I'm not sure I can think of an achievement that we can really say, yeah, the movement is responsible for that. I wish I could, but I don't think I can. I think we were way over optimistic when we used to say freedom in our time. It was youthful. I mean, I was in college. Come on, give me a break. I was in college. Give me a break. We were too busy telling the administration, if you let the New Left shut down this university, we have a contract with you because we pay tuition. We're going to sue you. That's what we were busy doing, and fighting the Vietnam War.
I do think, I don't know if the liberty movement caused it, but I do think that gay legalization of gay marriage is a good thing. I think that the liberalization of the marijuana laws, I think that's been a good thing. But by and large, it's like Jefferson said that the natural course of things is for government to increase and liberty to decrease, and it seems like the momentum is. Even if you had a unified liberty movement, it would be very difficult to fight Leviathan. Never mind when we're as fragmented as we are.
I agree. There's a lot of indoctrination, of course, through the schools, which is one of the purposes of the public schools. I mean, I've done some historical work. I have a book on public schooling, and in the 19th century, one of the main goals was promote good citizenship, create good citizens. But that meant a very benign look at the power of government. And of course, as the progressive era comes along, you get a really change in thinking. They thought the Constitution is way too constraining. It's also too hard to change. So let's change it without really changing it. And by the way, it relates to one of last week's Supreme Court decisions, and this got badly reported, I believe, in the media, when they said that a president, of course, everybody said a president, oh, Trump, but it means any president can fire a member of the FTC and the other alphabet agencies. Doesn't have to be for cause, right? For showing up drunk or never showing up, but just because I don't agree with you don't agree with my philosophy, therefore I'm firing you. No, it shouldn't be an FTC. But it was wrong for the Wilsonians in the progressive era to think they could create free-floating agencies that aren't accountable to either Congress or directly accountable to Congress or the president. Even though it holds executive power, it's not fully under the executive branch. And those should have been struck down right then. But if they're still going to exist, the president should be able to fire, because then he's accountable. People can get mad at the president if they don't like what the FTC is doing, or the others, FDA, all the others. We should get rid of them. I want to make that clear. But if they're not getting rid of, at least you don't want them free floating and quote independent, which was what the progressive movement was all about, right? They wanted the rule of experts, independent experts, which means, the individuals that make up the country have no accountability. No, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, but if we're going to have government, at least I want it heavily constrained. I want democracy in chains, to use a book title by a woman who doesn't think democracy should be in chains, although she doesn't really believe that either. Now, unfortunately, the Roberts at the Supreme Court carved out an exception for the Fed. He seemed to say, well, the Fed's different from those other ones, and so I have a feeling they wouldn't let the president fire. That is a separate case, and I won't get into the weeds on that. But,
okay.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go, I want to end all my shows from now on a positive note. Say something positive about capitalism.
Well, you're asking me that with only a few minutes left. It would take me like a week, and even there, I would only scratch the surface.
That's true.
Well, there's a lot of argument over what that word means, right? And so notice how capitalism has been coupled with many, many adjectives. So, you and I and Rand and others and Rothbard would say laissez-faire capitalism, free market capitalism, liberal capitalism, perhaps. Those are the popular ones, meaning I really mean separation of state and economy. But how often has it been called state capitalism, political capitalism, crony capitalism? That's a favorite of our friend Gene Epstein's. Those are not capitalism. So I don't ever use those terms, state capitalism or any of the others, because because that means the state has a substantial role, and it's not just like setting the traffic rules, right? Okay, we have a speed limit, but otherwise you can go wherever you want. Just observe this, for safety purposes, observe the speed limit. People that wanted to go beyond that, namely the progressive types and Mamdani types, they're not advocates. Well, he wouldn't call himself an advocate of capitalism, but I don't think we should use the crony, state, monopoly, political capitalism, because it's like saying, okay, my adjective cancels out the noun. So don't say it.
Yeah.
We have to say laissez-faire to emphasize that we don't mean those phony capitalisms. I think we should maybe use the term authentic capitalism versus, not all forms of non-capitalism. It's the system. I mean, I'm using the definition that would be similar to Rand's. It's the system that defends where individual rights are respected. And so people can engage in trade, all kinds of voluntary associations, peaceful voluntary associations. But with capitalism, we're thinking more of economic stuff. So trade, conversion of resources to your use as long as there's not theft involved. In other words, first appropriation, and then trade, and all that other stuff. Time preference, stages of production. I love Menger. I love Bomberwerk. I love Mises. It's like breathing pure oxygen when you read their work. It's really like the freshest of fresh air. It's the system. It's what people. Here's what I like to say. I've thought of this years ago. It's what people do and are if the government's leaving them alone, or other aggressors are leaving them alone. They don't become socialists. They don't become commune. A few do, and then of course communes break up because they have disagreements over what the plan should be. There may be 100% unanimity on that there should be a plan, but no way will there be unanimity on what the plan should be.
Yeah,
that's a big difference. You can all endorse a plan. I mean, this is a point Hayek makes in The Road to Serfdom, right? You can get everybody to agree, there should be a plan. But then when it gets down to the details, like how much steel, how much aluminum, how many cars, how many washing machines, lightning will strike twice before you get anything even close to it. So it's what people do and are, namely behave like capitalists. I'm using that in the broadest sense, when they're left free of aggression, when aggression is barred from society. So what we need to do is strive for the barring of aggression. You and I, minarchists and anarchists will have differences over how best to do that, but that is what we're aiming at.
Sure is.
The outlawing one way or another of aggressive force, the initiation of physical force, to use Rand's title. So, a lot of people won't regard me as an objectivist, and it may be misleading for me to call myself that, but I'm deeply in that camp as far as the philosophical basics go. I have disagreements with some applications, but I don't know of any difference I have in the fundamentals of the philosophy.
Awesome. All right, Sheldon, where can people find you? Where's your Substack?
Well, there it is. Free. It's sheldonrichman.substack.com. Yeah, you'll find me there. So, or you just go to Substack and search for me. That's where all of my articles are these days. I have a Friday article that I've been writing since 2006 in different places called TGIF, The Goal is Freedom. TGIF, The Goal is Freedom. And occasional comments, but I'm not very active on social media anymore. I know you like the combat.
I hate it.
Well, then you're a masochist.
Well, no, because I understand that to promote my shows, I need to be on social media.
And I post my article link every Friday there, but I don't check back to see how many likes I'm getting and engage. I don't want to engage in especially like on X, the conversation can be so inane.
It evolves very quickly.
As you well know, I'll occasionally click like on your stuff.
Thank you.
You've noticed that, or I've even commented, but always in a supportive way.
Yes,
People
yes.
get. I don't know if it's because
Well,
they feel they're anonymous or something, but people get stupid very often.
I don't know. Both you and Gene, neither one of you seems too hesitant to argue with me when you disagree.
Well, but it's always very nice and civil.
No, it's great. I tell people I don't want people to just come on my shows and agree with me. What if I'm wrong? You know what I mean? I need people to tell me when they think I'm wrong, allow me to think it over, and then come to my own conclusions.
The best line in John Stuart Mill's on liberty is, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." I've memorized that. It's the only quote I have hanging anywhere in my apartment. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that.
I love it. All
you
right,
don't even need to
Sheldon,
read you don't need to read the book now. It's a short book.
No, that's great.
And he's not one of my favorite liberals. He ended up a socialist. He stupidly said, "We've solved the problem of production. Now we need to solve the problem of distribution." Bad mill.
Bad mill. Sheldon, thank you so much. And of course, I'm going to have you back on. You're always a wealth of information. And audience, thank you very much. This has been the Michael Liebowitz Show. Until next time.